Welcome back, everyone. Today, I'm going to go over a very significant and important report for you. I'm going to detail the 10 or top 10 emerging real estate markets in the United States. Let's get started. Welcome back, everyone. This is a really special report, and I know I say that quite a bit, but if you know from any of my videos, I am very research heavy. I'm very analytical when it comes to my measurements or my estimations, forecasts, or any markets that I picked. And I've been forecasting markets since 2016, and I have a long model that I sell if any of you want it. This methodology I use to measure a number of metros. And when I take that, I then compare it to the economist out there. And the report that we'll be reviewing today is from PwC, a very big four consulting firm. And the good news is my top predictions are very much aligned with their top predictions. So I'm going to give you those top 10 markets. And if you stay to the end, I'll give you a bonus 2 that will make it the top 12. Okay. Now, this report, if you want to read it in entirety, you totally can. It's yours free from me. It's a 127-page report. So it's a very detailed economic synopsis of what's happening in the market, what's driving these conclusions. And I think if you really want to read through it, you'll see that these top markets have a lot of reasons and variables supporting this conclusion. Okay, so with that said, I want to make mention of a few things, okay, because I think it's important to understand what is happening at a macro level, and then we'll dig into these markets. And I think what I'm going to do for you all too over the next few weeks, it takes a lot of work. I'm going to estimate my forecast on appreciation for each of these markets, and we'll dig deeper into each of these, okay? So again, this report is brought to you by PwC. And so this is founded by people who have PhDs and a lot of experience, okay? And they're effectively measuring what they call boom markets, right? And several of these I've already talked about in my other podcasts. Austin, we know that's going to be one, and Phoenix as well. But we'll go through where they all rank, okay? Now, what's interesting about these boom markets is not only have they seen faster growth in median income and population, which again, if you look at any of my videos, I talk about these two, among other variables, being very important variables to be tracking when you look at markets, right? Median income growth and population growth. And these boom markets that they're talking about all have faster than average growth rates in these two variables, okay? Now, there's also these other boom towns. And this is interesting because in my book that I wrote some time ago, I talk about the importance of tracking millennials, tracking the young professionals and what they're doing. They're the trendsetters. They know where the party's at, right, if you will. And so they're going to dictate some of the growth and some of the investments by the big boys who are developing in these markets, right? So PwC goes on to talk about these new boom towns, right? What are the boom towns that the young professionals are moving to? And we'll get into that later in this segment. And some other key trends, again, at a macro level, we're seeing essentially the core urban centers, so the very big cities, the tall rise cities, we're seeing population growth stall. And it should not be a surprise. COVID's really made that or really accelerated that departure from these cities. If you can't access restaurants, if you can't access the entertainment, if things are closing down, then why pay the enormous rents to have access to things that don't exist? So naturally, people are moving out of these expensive cities. They're going to the more suburban areas that are kind of urban. And what we're seeing is developers build these pseudo cities in these suburban markets, right? And so we'll get into some of those markets as well to say, okay, here are the markets that are reinventing themselves to attract those young professionals, to attract the millennials that want to experience the city life but don't want to live in the city, okay? Another key macro indicator that we're seeing, affordable housing is going to be a major focus point. And well, now it already is. And I think with the Biden cabinet and administration, we can expect a lot of focus on funding towards affordable housing. And so there's actually a crisis right now with affordable housing. And whatever that crisis is, expect it to explode here in the next 3 to 5 years. So begin to think about how to shape your investment strategy around what that might mean for rentals. Generally, I think that means a lot of tailwind for rental properties if people can't afford to buy homes. So that's going to be good for rental increases, and I think ultimately your returns on your rental properties. Okay. So, with that said, I'm going to skip a lot. So, again, there's a lot in that report. If you really want to dig down into the macro trends, there's a lot in there, right? But I want to give you right to the chase the top 10 markets that, according to my analytics and their research, deserve to be in the top 10. Okay. And so I'm going to do this in reverse order, 10 to 1. Okay. And some of these actually surprised me. I don't have all these on my list. Primarily the ones in the Northeast, I've seen a lot of population migration away from these cities. And so the ones in the Northeast were not on my list. So good for PwC to bring those in. And so we're going to go with number 10, which is fascinating to me, is Boston, Massachusetts. Now, I don't know much about Boston, so I can't comment on it. We do know it's heavy in the universities, top universities. And actually, before Silicon Valley, Boston was the mecca of innovation. And before South San Francisco, which has now become essentially the biotech mecca, Boston was number one as well. So Boston has a lot of resemblance of Silicon Valley, and so it's not quite a surprise that they're on the top 10. Now, the rental market, I don't know much about, but it is in terms of growth across the board. We are seeing a lot of growth there. Number 9, this one should not be a surprise to you. It's Washington, D.C. and Northern Virginia. It's expensive to live there. I don't think, I talked to a client recently, I don't think you're going to cash flow in that market from a rental standpoint, but it's consistently grown over time. And partly because every 2 years you have some sort of political change. And with that, people have to move there to do the campaigning. So there's a lot of need for rental housing. There's a lot of need for housing in general. And that's where there's a lot of jobs there. And so naturally, with all that growth, people are moving from the more rural areas around DC and moving to where the action is, moving to where the jobs are. Okay. Now here's one that I have definitely been talking about, and I work with a developer in this market that builds brand new fourplexes, and I see a lot of upside for this market, and that's Salt Lake City. Right. They've attracted a lot of people there in the last 10 years. And you're seeing job growth, you're seeing wage growth, population growth. That's a really hot market. Now, here's one. It's been on the radar for a while, and I'm not the biggest fan of Florida for a number of reasons. Primarily, the economy is just not that diverse. You'll see in my other videos, I talk about the need to have a diverse economy. Florida just doesn't have it. It's a lot of entertainment, a lot of service, and a lot of markets there are going to be hindered by the COVID for sure. But this one has definitely drawn the interest of a lot of investors, and that's Tampa or St. Petersburg. That's on the west side. I've heard great things. I never visited. I visited a lot of Florida just to see the beaches and whatnot, but I've heard a lot of good things in terms of growth in the Tampa market. Now, these next 5 I've talked about. I absolutely love these next 5 markets. I think they are going to be the mecca of where we're going to see all the growth in the future. When you think about where people are moving to from New York, from Chicago, from California, these are the markets that they're moving to. Okay. And I'm really excited to share with you number 1, because I think, I'm a big fan of Austin in general, but number 1 is not Austin. I'll tell you that much. And I think there's a lot of upside for that market, and rentals still cash flow in that one. So just hold on for a second. So number 6, I think this city had the fortitude to wait for a bit and see how other cities developed. And this city, Charlotte, they've done a hell of a job of developing. If you go there, it's relatively clean, it's affordable, there's a lot going on. They've developed that city in the right way. It's growing like gangbusters. A lot of people are moving there. And it's generally a relatively pro-landlord state. And so if you haven't been, it's worth visiting. And I see a lot of upside for Charlotte as well. Now, number 4, here's one that over the last 8 years has seen 1 million people move to this metro, right? And I think if it's not already, the airport is the most active airport in the United States. It's expanding, and this one is definitely a growth story. I'm surprised it's not in the top 2, but Dallas-Fort Worth, no income tax state, pro-business, pro-landlord. There are some outskirts of Dallas and Fort Worth that do cash flow. So you can get rental properties there for a $175 to $250 price point that do cash flow. It's a great market across the board, tons of jobs, tons of corporations, tons of, income growth, tons of population growth. The formula is so strong for that city. This next one is interesting. Again, I think this is one that's driven by a lot of tech people. It's got a lot of good universities as well. A lot of young millennials, they are moving there. This is a trend-setting city. A lot of good music, and if you're thinking about music, you're probably thinking about Nashville, right? So Nashville, Tennessee, I think has a lot of upside, and there's a lot of cities around there too. Murfreesboro is one that still produces good rental properties. I don't think Nashville proper in the core produces cash flowing properties, but right around Nashville, where people want to live as well in the suburban area, it does produce rental properties. So take a look there. Number two is one of my favorites. I've been talking about it. It's where I live, Austin, Texas. The new Silicon Valley, or Silicon Hills, as they call it, it is going to be in the mecca of this triangle known as San Antonio, Dallas, and Austin. I think you're going to see a massive population migration, as you've already seen here. You know, I'm predicting a massive appreciation, and there's a video here if you want to check that out, and you can see why I think the appreciation is going to be so substantial there. But Austin, Texas is set up to be a fantastic investment market long term. And number one, this one is interesting because I think it goes unheard of, but there's a lot of good universities there. There is becoming another biotech hub in the triangle. You have the Tar Heels from UNC. You have Duke University right there. It's a lot of education resembling a lot of Boston back in the day, and it's still very affordable. You can find rentals there in Durham that it's an urban area that's growing in popularity and are very affordable. Raleigh-Durham, number one spot. It's a great market from a number of ways. Again, high population growth rates, high income growth rates, and generally it's a good young crowd that you're seeing there. In fact, I spent a lot of time there, and it's also a good food scene. So if you haven't been, definitely worth the visit, and I think you'll see the growth. Okay. Now, I do want to add two more to the list because I think these are interesting ones. When you looked at the Amazon HQ2, right, this was a top 3 contender. And again, a massive metro. It's got the infrastructure to support massive population growth rates. And you're seeing a lot of things happen here too. And I think from a value standpoint, this market is definitely worth checking into, and that's Atlanta. Atlanta, Georgia is, again, doing one hell of a job. And then lastly, this is kind of an underdog that I've talked about in other videos, but San Antonio, right? Military base, a strong foundation of jobs. It has seen a kind of an impact from COVID. Cases are kind of high there. I expect to see some distress there, but that might result in opportunities for you to buy properties in that market. Okay. So those are the top 12 markets. I gave you 2 extra. And if you want to read the full report, again, it's going to be in the description of this video. Again, for being part of my subscriber base, you know I bring you this kind of content. And so do be sure to subscribe. But check out that link below. You'll find the report there. It's a lengthy one. But it's worth checking out. So let me know what you think. What are some of the markets that you're focusing on? And give it a thumbs up if you liked what you heard. Thanks.